walking from Haran and settling in Canaan. They explored the land before settling in the south on the northern edge of the Negev desert. Now reading from Genesis chapter 12 verse 10 through to chapter 13 verse 4. A famine came in the country, and Abram went down to Egypt to reside there, because the famine was heavy in the country. When he was near coming into Egypt, he said to Sarai his wife, "Here, please, I know that you're a woman who's attractive in appearance. When the Egyptians see you and say, 'She's my wife,' they may kill me and let you live. Please say that you're my sister, in order that things may be good for me on account of you, and I myself may live on by means of you." When Abram came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very attractive. The officials of Pharaoh saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's household. For Abram, things were good because of her. He had flock, herd, male and female donkeys, servants, maidservants, and camels. But Yahweh touched Pharaoh and his household with serious epidemics on account of Sarai, Abram's wife. Pharaoh called for Abram and said, "What is this that you've done to me? Why didn't you tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, 'She's my sister'? So I got her for myself as a wife. Now here's your wife, take her and go." Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him and sent him off, him and his wife and all that he had. So Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him, to the Negev. Now Abram was a man of great substance, with livestock, with silver, and with gold. In his moving on, he went from the Negev as far as Bethel, as far as the place where his tent had been formerly, between Bethel and Ai, the site of the altar that he made there at first. There Abram called in Yahweh's name. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So having moved to the south, Abram finds that there is a famine. And so Abram has to make a choice, because he has a huge responsibility for a lot of people, and probably sheep, cattle, and maybe donkeys as well. And so he leads his tribe into Egypt. Now, Egypt is a country that's not dependent on rainfall because of the River Nile, whose catchment area is in the mountains. So as a result, Egypt is less susceptible to famine. Now comes a challenge to Abram. Sarai, his wife, is beautiful, and Abram gets it into his head that the Egyptians will kill him so that they can take Sarai. So what solution does he come up with? Well, he comes up with a lie, or maybe strictly a half-truth. He decides that Sarai should say she is his sister, and as we discover later in Genesis, she is in fact his half-sister. The main point of this part of the story is that Abram did not trust God, but rather risked his wife Sarai to save his own skin. I have to say that you would think that Sarai, particularly given what we know of her character later on, could have refused. Surely she could see where this would lead. But Sarai doesn't, and she goes into Pharaoh's harem. We don't know if anything happened, and indeed it may be that nothing did because of the plagues that befell, or as that version that we had that I read a few moments ago, serious epidemics when they took place in with Pharaoh and his household. Genesis doesn't tell us, nor does it say how Pharaoh worked out the connection between the epidemics and Abram and his wife. Maybe it was that God disclosed it to him. Whichever way you look at it, Abram, the great man of faith, knows what it is to desert the way of faith, to experience fear, and to fall into temptation. The significance of the story is that Abram and Sarai got into a mess, and God gets them out of it. Things happen. Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, when a strange new creature arrives, or Noah discovering that the fruit of the vine produces something happening that he hadn't bargained for. The good news is that God doesn't abandon Adam and Eve and Noah. The make or break is not their actions, but God's. And we have to figure it out in much the same way as we do with Jesus' parables in the Gospels. So often, when we discover things for ourselves, we're more likely to treat them seriously than if we're told them straight. So we're shaped by working out where Abraham and Sarah made mistakes and what they should have done instead. When Pharaoh responds, then God puts things right. Another part of the story is that mistakes on our part can, of course, have consequences for other people. It's particularly poignant that last time we were looking at God making Abraham a blessing to many, and indeed to the whole world. The next thing is that he's bringing trouble to the Egyptians. And actually, of course, it turns out very well for Abraham, because he's given sheep and cattle, donkeys, servants, camels. In fact, Pharaoh, you could say, is blessing Abraham. So the wealthy Abraham and his tribe go back to where it started, in Bethel. And there Abraham worshipped. Abraham understood that he needed forgiveness, he needed cleansing, he needed renewal. He went back to places where he'd been worshipping God before, and God received him back. So, will the next generation learn the lessons of the problems of going to Egypt? Well, of course, not at all. I'm sure that the Israelites in Egypt at the time of Moses and just before would have been hoping that what happened to Abraham would happen to them, and they would be released to go back to the promised land. And that is, of course, what happened. So what can we today, in the 21st century, learn about this passage? Well, when we mess up, maybe not as badly as Abraham, or maybe in some of our cases just as badly, God will come and rescue us. Not necessarily in the way that we hoped for, and certainly in the way that is best for us. We clearly need to learn lessons from the past, and we always need to remember to repent and allow God to renew us. So, more next time as we look at the very unusual story of